welcome and thank you for being with us, Marty Chavez.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I want to dive right into the meat of what we're talking about here today. There's been so much talk during this time about digital transformation and how that's accelerating, and yet I think a lot of people actually weren't doing it that well before this period. So something tells me that a lot of people, a lot of companies are about to make a lot of mistakes. But you're somebody who pioneered this kind of transformation, did it well. So hopefully we get a sense from you about some do's and don'ts and what's really going on. I want to start with the workforce and the skills, the different set of skills that people and organizations need to develop to thrive in this environment. What are your top targets in that arena?
Well, on skills, I think I wouldn't say anything that's too shocking here, which is that is my view, and I've seen it borne out in practice, certainly on Wall Street, that not everyone needs to be a coder. I think the idea of coding is it's valuable, it's wonderful for people who are into that, but the idea that everybody should learn to code, I don't know, but everybody does need to have an algorithmic, data-driven, problem-solving mindset, right? So I would say that that's a baseline skill for every professional in the workplace, no matter what your role is. And as for coding, I think of it much like writing an English sentence. Everybody needs to be able to do that, but relatively few of us will have a profession where we get paid for writing English sentences, right? As a best-selling author, or even as there's so many other ways in which writing is your job. I don't think that everybody needs to be able to write a sentence to the level where they get paid for writing to be their job, but it's something that everybody needs to do.
Is it at that level? Is it at that level because where everybody needs to literally know how to code, even if they don't do it for a living, or is it more in the realm of everybody's got to understand Shakespeare, even if they don't write plays, which I think is different. Like it's not like we have to write plays every once in a while, but just do it on the side. Is it more of an understanding of the way of thinking and framing and seeing the world, or does there need to be some level of practice in every person?
There needs to be some practice, right? So I don't think that you will really get what it is to be a data-driven, algorithmically driven problem solver if you haven't actually written a little bit of code, right? I think that that's just a way to do it. And as for writing code, right, I think we're thinking of COBOL or Fortran or more modern Java and Python, but there's many other ways to write code these days. There's a whole industry of companies that are called low code or no code. I'm teaching my kids a kind of coding that is really just dragging blocks around on a screen, very pretty blocks, and hooking them up. That is absolutely coding, where the tedium of typing things into programming language has been taken away, and it's just reduced to let's solve a problem using data and algorithms. And I think everybody needs to do some of that.
What are the ways that you expect that to work in some professions where we don't think of that as being core? So if we're talking retail, and maybe retail managers and employees, do they really need to be coding? What kinds of things would they be coding?
Well, while I think about that, let me give you an example that I've actually seen from Wall Street, where once upon a time, compliance people had a legal and regulatory skill set. But then as the things that needed to comply were actually things, they were algorithms, they were algos, they were trading algos, and not just people, we discovered that we needed compliance professionals, not just people who could think about code in some abstract way, but people who could actually read the code and assess for themselves whether the code was in compliance with all the laws and regulations and all of the concerns about reputational risks. And so the firm ended up building out a whole organization of people who had exactly this intersection of skill sets of computer science and law, to such a degree that when people would ask me, like my nieces and nephews, what should they study? I'd say, well, a winning combination is to study some computer science and get a law degree. You will be very busy for a long time. So that's an example of something that might not have been obvious. And I think in general, in retail, I'm seeing this certainly with electronic retail, right? When you're thinking about fraud detection as one example, or about showing your potential customers things that they might want to buy. I think having that skill set where you actually deeply understand it is important, because, John, what we found again and again is that if you have one group of people telling another group of people, hey, would you please build this software for me that does X, Y, and Z, that doesn't work very well. They're talking different languages and they're talking past each other. And one thing that worked really well, and I was really just part of this experiment, not the author of it or the pioneer of it, was putting people with an algorithmic problem-solving skill set in the trading business, right in between the traders and the salespeople. And that ended this problem of people talking past each other, because the data scientist or computer scientist was living and breathing the trading business. And it's only then that we actually finally managed to build the right software. And I think that pattern applies in any business, and Wall Street was just on the leading edge of that.
Huh, interesting. Let's talk about the pandemic. And you've got an idea, or at least a way of looking at things that makes a lot of sense to me, that COVID served as a catalyst for reactions that were already taking place. It's not as if it created a whole new world. It just accelerated some things that were already taking place, but maybe put different kinds of pressures to bear on that. Given that that's the way we'll look at the world in this conversation, what do companies, what do leaders need to do to make sure that they get the maximum benefit out of that catalyst?
Well, so I love the term catalyst, right? It's not going to make something happen that isn't going to happen. It's got to be something that had the possibility of occurring to begin with. And the catalyst just makes it happen faster, gets you over that activation barrier faster. And we've seen many examples. One of my favorite examples, and I'll get back to your question, like you would love to be able to plan for all of this and engineer for all of this. But there's a company that I've been working with. I'm a board member. It's called Page, and it is a computer-aided, it is computer tools for pathologists. And the dream of Page is show it a slide of a tissue specimen, and it will circle the cells that are cancerous, right? And how that is actually coming into reality is that you can think of Page as a machine learning enabled microscope. It's just like a microscope, but it's digital, and it helpfully suggests to a pathologist, no eliminating of a pathologist, but it aids the pathologist and says, be sure to look at these cells. They might be cancerous, and it might be this kind of cancer. And so what is the pandemic side effect of this? Well, the company in the depths of the pandemic got an emergency use authorization from the FDA, because one of the side benefits of looking at these tools, creating these tools for pathologists, is now you have a digital workflow for pathologists so they can work from home. Whereas previously the entire workflow required the pathologist to be in the hospital or clinical setting, right? So this is something that the pandemic revealed faster than it would otherwise have revealed, that in addition to the machine learning that helps identify cancerous cells, just completely changing the workflow so that it can be done from anywhere is in itself valuable. As for how do we do things differently in order to avail ourselves of these benefits, I wish that there were I wish that there were a formula for it. I think it really comes down to resilience. But if there is one principle, John, I would say it's this. It is looking at a workflow, which is end to end, all the way from your client or customer or patient through your whole business and all of its systems and all of its people, back out to all of the other people who are stakeholders. And you need to look at that entire workflow, not just a little piece of it, and ask yourself, what should this experience look like? Who should say what to whom and when? And are there steps that are manual, that are cutting and pasting and emailing spreadsheets that just don't make sense? And are there constraints, like a person needs to be in this physical location, that made sense 10 years ago, but perhaps don't make sense now? And so if you're thinking about your end-to-end workflow and asking what should that workflow be? And then when you got the new workflow, ask what parts of this are computers just going to be better at, faster, less error prone, and let the computers do that. And what you constantly find, you never find, in my experience, that the people are made obsolete. What you find is that it frees people up to do things that only people can do, leaving other things to the machines. So I think if you're approaching it that way, you're going to be in a great position to uncover these unexpected serendipitous possibilities.
Let's talk about diversity of thought and along other lines within an organization as we're dealing with this digital transformation. It strikes me that at this time, when we're talking about the corporate, economic, and social impacts of workforces and opportunity perhaps not being equally distributed, we're also talking about emphasizing skills in digital arenas like computer science, data science, that are even more skewed demographically than the workforce as a whole. So how do we solve for both of those things at the same time? Because if we're emphasizing a certain set of skills that a narrower demographic has, that's going to have an impact on who has power and who has opportunity in the organization.
Well, let's start with the general case for diversity, right? So one valuable way of looking at it is to think of diversity as, in addition to portfolio diversification, the only free lunch that we've got, right? So it was established decades ago that you can have a portfolio with the same risk and higher returns, or lower risk and same returns, simply by diversifying it. And we found the same thing in the workforce. By bringing in people who just look at things in a different way, you will uncover possibilities reliably that you would have simply just missed because everybody was siloed and group thinking, right? So that's the case for diversity. And certainly when I look back at my career, one of the things for which I'm immensely grateful when I think about Goldman Sachs specifically is that the firm had a custom of throwing people into new businesses. I remember I was asked to go into the M&A business, and I reminded everybody that I didn't know anything about mergers and acquisitions. And the thinking was, well, maybe you'll figure out some new twist because you'll just have a different perspective. So when you look, and in fact, yes, and it wasn't, it wasn't any. It wasn't about me personally, right? It was just, you throw a derivatives quant into some business that's never had one, and maybe something magical happens. And indeed that was the case.
Give me an
and
example.
Of course, yeah. So as an example, and any interesting product certainly on Wall Street has many people who worked on making it happen. And I was just one. But the idea was, companies need to buy back shares in their own stock. It's part of their capital management. And the traditional way of doing that was you pay a broker dealer a commission, maybe half a penny a share, for all the shares that are bought in. And so the company pays the volume weighted average price plus a penny multiplied by the total number of shares. And everybody's kind of unhappy. There's only half a penny of commission in there. And on the other hand, on the company side, that was expensive multiplied by 1 billion shares, right? And so the question was, could we do this in a derivative format? And back in 2004, 2005, that was considered kind of a completely crazy idea. The received wisdom is there were 100 reasons why you couldn't get there from here. It wasn't doable. You'd have to file a prospectus with every short sale. There wouldn't be a safe harbor. You'd have to disclose the entire transaction structure. You wouldn't be able to delta hedge. Everybody knew it couldn't be done. But you throw someone who's a derivatives quant, and that's really all he knows how to do, then that person might work with a bunch of other people, professionals with many skill sets, with a fresh look, and not having received the memo that it was impossible. You end up with a new structure. So that's the kind of diversity that I'm talking about, right? And it can be historically underrepresented people, absolutely. And sometimes it can be what happens if you throw a data scientist into a business, right? The data scientist will just make different connections. An issue broadly is what you described, which is are we able to hire data scientists who are as diverse as the demographics in which we operate? And this is a very challenging problem, as you know, but I'm happy to say that the landscape is changing really, really fast. I'm on the board of a university, and one of the things that we're observing in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences is that the diversity in that school, which used to be straight white males, is changing really rapidly in the last 5 to 10 years, and is now reflecting the demographics of the US broadly. That's a very promising sign, because of course that's the input for companies. But simply having a new analyst class that is diverse is not enough. Companies also have to do proactive work to foster and sponsor and grow the careers of diverse people through all the levels of the organization.
And is it just through all the levels of the organization, or is it also before they're even in the organization? It seems to me that there have long been these sort of informal pipelines into
Yes.
organizations, whether
Yes.
it's specific colleges, whether it's kind of the legacy effect of my neighbor worked at Goldman Sachs, or my father worked at Goldman Sachs, or my mother worked at Goldman Sachs, or I'm just in circles and went to camp with people who ended up working at Goldman Sachs, right? So there have been these informal pipelines. Are there ways to create either formal pipelines that are more diverse, or to encourage the organic creation of different informal pipelines into an organization so we get more of those effects, like the derivatives quant effect that you just talked about?
All right, so great question. There's a variety of things that work. And so encouraging the creation of informal networks is super important. They don't necessarily scale in the way that you would want, right? So one thing diverse people on Wall Street, like me, will reliably tell you is that depending on diverse people, whether they're Black or Hispanic or LGBT or women, to own the diverse recruiting and make their firms more diverse, that's not going to work. If I had been waiting for a Hispanic LGBT mentor on Wall Street, I'd still be waiting, right? So, and really, I attribute the progress I made in my career to sponsors who were, in almost every case, straight white males, right? So everybody has to own the creation of these diverse networks. And then the other thing that we can do with technology that's exciting, that was just hard to do even 10 years ago, and this is certainly true of recruiting engineers, computer scientists, and data scientists, in the old days, there used to be only so many universities that you could actually talk to in a formal way with recruiting events on campus, right? There's not going to really be any way that you can attend 3,000 on-campus recruiting days. So you end up sending your team out to 10, right? And so, well, that worked, but wouldn't it be wonderful if you could actually recruit at scale from all the universities in the country? And indeed you can now with automated recruiting tools that, for instance, assess candidates' software design and engineering skills. You can assess large talent pools across many, many universities, and you can do that at scale. And those are practically guaranteed to be more diverse in all senses of the word. And that has been a huge change.
That will find more of the prepared.
Yes.
Can we prepare more of the talented?
Yes. Okay. Yes, we can, and we must. When I look back at Goldman Sachs, one of the things I'm most grateful for is a program that we put in place in about 2009, 2010 called Goldman Sachs Gives. And when I look back at all the organizations that I contributed to through that program, it's basically a program where the partners get a chunk of their comp not paid to them, but actually allocated into a donor advised fund. And then the partners can advise and where it can go. And when I look at code.org and Girls Who Code, there's so many of these organizations that are grassroots, right? Code.org is committed to giving a computer science education that's first rate to every student. And it is a marvelous curriculum. I've got 2 small kids and we do a dose of code.org every single day. So I'm a personal beneficiary of it, but it is exactly intended to get to this challenge you described, right? But even when we've got a free, wonderful curriculum, that's still not enough. You need to distribute it to the kids. You need to make them aware of it. You need adults in the children's life who are going to care enough to make sure that they sit down and do it. You need an internet connection. You need an iPad. So we're not nearly done on this, but it's a start.
It's a start. A start is important. And that's where we'll leave it with this session. I had a great time picking your brain on these issues. We went from the organization all the way back to kids doing code.org. Thanks everyone for joining. You will be automatically directed back to the main stage, or you can click main stage at the top of the page to head back for the final session. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks.